Hello and welcome. This is Rachel Bolton and I'm here with Birgitt Williams. And we're making this video today to share with members of our Genuine Contact organization, the Genuine Contact organization, just to talk a little bit about the origin story of many of the tools that show up in our Genuine Contact program. This video isn't about teaching you about these tools. You, of course, can do that in the different modules of the Genuine Contact program. Uh, we also will be sharing some little video clips that we have in our resources with you so that you can learn a little bit more about some of them. What it is about is making sure that you have some knowledge about where these tools came from. What is their origin? What is the provenance of them? So that you're comfortable with that knowledge inside of yourself, and also in case any of your clients are ever wondering about where the different tools that are part of this Genuine Contact program come from. That took a little while. Here we go with the first of the tools. And Birgitt, I want to turn it over to you to share a little bit about this cycle of transformation, the organizational transformation diagram.
Thank you, Rachel. So much of our work with Genuine Contact actually goes back into looking at this particular tool. We do need to understand that whenever we do something with an organization, change is happening. It's quite often transformational change that is being requested of us. And so this particular diagram relates to a particular model, a simplified model of organizational transformation, the cycle of transformation. I began studying organizational transformation back in 1986 when those words started to be used in different industries. That was the time that people were just starting to discuss what did it take to do organizational transformation. I was very intrigued by the work of Miriam Levy and in South Africa. And there were different models that were being offered from the work that Miriam Levy did about what organizational transformation looked like. And he suggested that there was a cycle, some kind of a decline that was happening, and eventually some kind of a building up. So the origins of this particular diagram have been pulled up from that groundbreaking work by Miriam Levy in the 1980s, 1990s. Added to by understanding of the decline component of the cycle of transformation, being the way that people go through their grief work, and then being added to by once people start reframing something and eventually stabilizing something. What are those stages? What does that look like when we're looking at organizational transformation? So it goes back into that early work about transformation, which is a particular kind of change. In more recent days, you have the work of that is in the book Built to Change that actually speaks specifically about organizational transformation as a particularly difficult type of change work to do. This particular model is one that helps leaders and helps consultants, coaches to understand the cycle of transformation, to be able to discuss it, to determine for themselves if this model plays out for them when they're undertaking transformation.
Thank you for all of that. We're going to move along now to the next of the tools. And I really love that we've got this one in here because I think it's a tool that we don't often talk about as explicitly as some of the others in our Genuine Contact program. And that is the tool of the psychological or social contract.
You can certainly look up psychological contracts or social contracts in your own research using a search engine on the internet. When my own background is very much steeped in psychology and ultimately in organizational psychology, so I've been very much fascinated by the psychological contract or the social contract that takes place when enough people in a group agree to something as, for example, what the culture of an organization is or what the culture of a family is. It's often not written up. It's often not spoken about. It is simply present. And when in its presence, when it's unacknowledged and not spoken about, it creates really deep roots in how behavior is enacted. So we draw to the attention of you in this particular video that it's worthwhile to look at the roots of psychological and social contract work, the concept itself, when you are working to help a group to undergo change. The previous tool, the cycle of transformation, is one that we keep in mind in all the work that we do. This psychological social contract and how to adjust and change that psychological social contract in an organization is another part of the work that we're doing the whole time that we're working with the different modules of the Genuine Contact program. It's usually not spoken about. I have this in here for you to be aware that this is what is going on. And as the slide says, often that psychological social contract develops an illusion of a particular reality. And when enough people buy into the illusion, it is co-illusion, which when you shorten that word, co-illusion, it becomes collusion. We all collude that this is a particular reality. And in families and other kinds of organizations, including very large organizations, people anchor themselves into that collusion in order to belong, in order to feel that they're fitting in. And it is an essential part of the work that we do, which is to help people create a different story together.
So one more that I think is a reminder and a tool all at the same time before we dive into tools that you might be more familiar with is the idea of demything the organization. And I really love this particular diagram. And in case you can't read that text at the bottom, I'll just read it out. It says, a huge breakthrough is achieved when work is done to limit the givens or non-negotiables to those which are actually true for the organization.
I also have been a student for almost all of my life of myths, of story, and the way that myths get created, the way that myths get bought into. Some of the groundbreaking work or well-known work about mythology, including work about the hero's journey, was done by Joseph Campbell. And the in terms of my studies of organizational psychology, organizational transformation, it was essential for me to understand the way that myths, the common myths, the myth of the hero, the myth of the villain, the myth of romanticizing something, those are typical myths that we bring into the organization. And from those myths, and we can go back into specific mythology, specific myths that human beings get enamored with, and then how myths create particular stories in an organization. I would use the example where people in an organization frequently look for a villain who's the enemy, and then frequently romanticize where the solutions are going to come from, and will enact a lot of conflict based on the myth that there is a villain and the myth that there is a hero and the romanticizing of the hero. And people don't realize that they're in fact playing out ages-old myths as they're participating in their organization. And so the tool of drawing to the attention of people the value of demything the organization is rooted in my understanding of the powerful and subtle and not so subtle impacts in every organization I've ever encountered or those that I study on that organization and on what keeps it locked into particular behaviors and actions and beliefs.
Thank you. So we've looked over the last couple of minutes at some of the more implicit tools that we work with. And over the rest of this video, we're going to be looking at the more explicit tools that we use, the frequently used tools that if you have been working with Genuine Contact, you will likely be familiar with. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to find links to a little video that orients you to how to use each of these tools in the description of the video. If you're finding it on our website, we'll be including those links there as well so that you can check out a little bit of an overview of each of the tools and how it's used that we recorded some time ago. That's all videos that Birgitt did. And over the next couple of slides, we're going to look at each of these frequently used tools in terms of where its origin story lies. So the first of those tools is the storyline diagram.
This one dives very much into that implicit tool, and it's one of the reasons I started with those 3 implicit tools. The storyline or paying attention to story became very important for me in relation to how, as an organizational transformation expert, how could I assist people to look at the illusion or the collusion co-illusion, collusion that they might have be quite steeped in, and how could I assist them to work their way through that cycle of transformation, and how could I assist them to demyth the organization. And it all ended up with needing to look at story, and at the story of each and every person that made up that organization was a valid story. It was their story. And so I introduced into all of our genuine contact work the essential element that we had to know and feel skillful in working with story, in being able to assist people to processes, to assist people to feel comfortable to tell a story from their perspective, to have a process in which people didn't get ridiculed for the story that they chose to share, or that it was somehow inadequate, that it was important that voice could be given to the story. And in the module whole person process facilitation, more than the others, we get into much more in the way of examples of how to do story sharing. One of the simple tools that got developed was, okay, let's just ask people before they're going to participate in a meeting, for example, what's a meeting that we as consultants would be called into to help the organization through a change or transformation process. What's the story of the organization that leads up to it, and do different kinds of activities that allow people to populate this storyline diagram with stories, and the story of what's expected after the particular meeting or the particular change work that we're doing. The story is rooted in those three implicit tools for how to assist groups to get unhooked from where they are and create what they would like to become.
Thanks for sharing all of that. I think one of the things that's a maybe explicit conclusion to draw from the origin story of this is that this storyline diagram is very much rooted in genuine contact, and it is a simple way of expressing concepts that you created as part of this genuine contact program, of course rooted in other psychological work and organizational transformation work that had gone before that. Is that right about that origin?
Yes.
Good. So if you were looking at that list ahead and you're anticipating what comes next, you will expect to see the deep essence diagram perhaps on the next slide, but we're going to present something slightly different than that first.
And this is the origins of what led me to develop that deep essence diagram. And there were discussions with friends way back when, and this was again in the early 90s. And this was inspired by something that I learned from Harrison Owen, who's the developer of the meeting method, open space technology. And those philosophical discussions one can get into, and we would debate about, where did the body fit into things? Where did the mind fit into things? The intellect, was the intellect different from the mind? Then there was the soul, and then there was the spirit. And then in all of those discussions, which are based in different philosophical concepts, I came up with the concept of using an apple as a picture. So that's a sphere. So there's the full apple, which was the body. And then the mind, which was the next layer in, was the flesh of the apple. And the intellect, which was the next layer in, was the core of the apple. And the soul, which was the next layer in, was the protective coating of the seed. And then the spirit was the seed. Now, so when people ask me, where did this deep essence diagram come from? Where did the work of it come from? I wanted to share this with you because this is my creative process. This is how things emerge. They don't just, oh, here's a great diagram, let's use it, bang, bang, bang. It was all rooted in these conversations, which got into which came first. And Rachel, if you go to the next slide. We have the apple, and you see all the layers, and then started to think about, and this was very much part of those early on discussions. What gets in the way of us reaching our pure potential or working from our pure potential? And in those days, Harris and Owen had a particular way of looking at organizations. And it was a position he held onto pretty tightly, that they started out being reactive, then they could become responsive, then they could become proactive, then they could become interactive, and maybe then occasionally behave in an inspired way. And I presented this picture of this apple and said, no, that's the wrong order of things. And I said, what if it is inspired right from the start? What if spirit is there? What if there's inspiration? And every organization is the inspired organization, but we just get in the way of it. And in those days, the languaging with this diagram and the discussions that we were having had me look at spirit as that seed in the apple, that pure potential of what it could become. And everything else was layers that could get in the way of us working from our pure potential, could get in the way of the organization working from its pure potential. And then if all of those were in alignment, instead of all those layers getting in the way of working from our pure potential, they could support us acting out into the world with our pure potential. Now, Rachel, this isn't a scientific explanation at all. This comes very much from a philosophical standpoint. And I know that people will say, but where's the scientific evidence that the deep essence tool actually works? And when people say that, and if you could just go to the next slide for me, when people say that, oh, that wasn't the one I was expecting, but that's okay. People say that, I will say back to them that the scientific evidence for it could be found in all the work that has been done to what has been called the iceberg theory. And if you look at this particular visual, you see that above the surface of the water, so the water is the structure, above that is what's visible, which in the world of organizations are behaviors and actions. And that is out there, it's visible, but most of the iceberg is under the water. It's not visible because the structure, the water, just lets us see the behaviors and actions. So we get into the water of assumptions, we get into values, we get into the deep purpose in which is the we can find the potential of that organization. So this relates to some of the discussions that were happening when we looked at the iceberg theory. So if you want to understand the deep essence tool, and you can say, okay, some of its origin story is from philosophy, some is from the iceberg theory, of which there's lots of research been done.
And finally, we get to the tool itself. So it's been a great journey through the creative thinking process of how you arrived at developing this tool and some of the different origins that it's come from. Is there anything more you'd like to say as we look at the tool itself?
The only thing I'd like to say is, having come through all those discussions, like sometime in the early 90s, this particular diagram was developed as the very best rendition of looking at a sphere and what holds that in place. And one of the radial arms, if you imagine this as a sphere, is story. So take that back to the implicit tools we presented at the start of this video. Getting at story, it drives so much. The spirit, the potential, the spirit of something drives so much of what goes on in an organization. And with iceberg theory, you've got what is visible appearing at the outer edge, and then what supports those behaviors and actions to be engaged in the way that they are. So this took place in the early 90s, and so we spent the next decade testing with many organizations whether we were getting consistent and cross-cultural results when people use this tool. And by the end of the 90s, we had demonstrated that its validity over and over again.
Thank you. That was a very deep dive, perhaps a little pun there, into the deep essence tool. And I know I really appreciated listening to some of those pieces. So I'm sure that our members of the Genuine Contact organization will too. Moving on now to the next of our frequently used tools, which is the grief cycle.
And since you're all people who work within our Genuine Contact program, you know that we use the grief cycle. We teach the grief cycle in many of our modules, and we value the importance of the healing work of the grief cycle and the healing work of being aware of the grief cycle. I draw you back into the relationship of the grief cycle with the what's called the decline part of the cycle of transformation, which was the first slide we went into here, the first tool. And the work of this particular grief cycle was presented by Harrison Owen as a very oversimplified model of grief cycle work. And what he put into this that was different than what different authors of grief cycle work were writing about was he put into it the spot for open space, so that in grief cycle work, when people were starting to let go of what used to be and getting them ready to move on to something new, he was very insistent that there be a spot there for open space, which you could use the meeting method, open space technology there to help out. But what's referred to is simply having enough open space to dream about different possible futures instead of moving too quickly into just one. So this particular version, I attribute very much to the work of Harrison Owen, who was the developer of open space technology.
Thank you. Our next diagrams, also often asked about for where they came from and what their origin story is, are the defensive or accepting climates, also sometimes called the life nurturing and life depleting diagrams.
Yes, and the heading of defensive climate is equal to life depleting, and the heading of accepting climate is equal to life nurturing. And in the late 1980s, early 1990s, I was involved with a number of people at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, which at that time was a leading edge institution looking at adult learning. It was a place where people posed different hypotheses, proved them, disproved them, had great debates, and the focus was on education. And in the case of these diagrams, the focus that developed into these diagrams was about adults as learners. When I was developing my parts of the Genuine Contact program, I had the hypothesis that all adults, I mean, this isn't just about children, all adults are learning all the time. They're learning that which is what I think of as life depleting, or they're learning that which is life nurturing, but they're always learning. And if that is true, then it is also true that in an organization, in organizations, every organization is a learning organization. And I'm not speaking about the work of Peter Senge, who developed the learning organization in capital letters. This is lowercase, just all organizations are learning organizations. And again, if it is an accepting climate for the adult learners in an organization that make up the learning organization, certain kinds of responses are going to happen. And if it's a defensive climate where people feel they need to be defending themselves, where it's life depleting for them, where they're in survival mode, just to show up in the organization where it's toxic for them, you're going to end up with other kinds of behaviors happening. So I adapted what was being used at the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education into the work of organizations, and thought of the life depleting environment instead of defensive, and the life nurturing environment instead of accepting, as words that suited what we were doing with organizational change work, organizational transformation work. People say, but Birgitt, who exactly designed these particular words, this particular model? And I can't give credit to a single person. There were study groups of people that were playing around with this. And when I brought this into what became the Genuine Contact program, out of that work with the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, when I brought this out, and I started applying it, wanting something to apply to organizations to help them understand that they are learning organizations. all the time. They're learning something, and they might be learning what we want them to learn or not what we don't want to be learned behavior. That these were seemed to me to be a good way to help people to have conversations about whether they were creating a life depleting or life nurturing environment in their organization. So it is rooted in the work of studies of adult learners. There's lots of information available on the internet about adult learners. It is generic. What we have here is generic enough that it leads to great conversations and great intentions for changes in organizations.
Thank you for all of that. The next of our tools is to look at today is the medicine wheel tool.
This tool, which is, we use it to help individuals to navigate their lives, couples, families, teams, organizations. It is a multi-purpose tool that we use in many of the modules of the Genuine Contact program. I was a student of the medicine wheel for quite some time, beginning in the 1970s into the 1980s. I had the great good fortune to work with Native peoples in North America. I lived close to two Native reservations. I had people who were willing to mentor me, who were willing to direct my learning, and in that process became exposed to the medicine wheel as used by Native people throughout North America. By 1990, approximately 1990, I had the great good fortune to take some workshops with Dr. Angeles Arian and a doctor of anthropology and so much more. And she had researched globally with indigenous peoples all around the world about what was universal in their practices. She didn't want to know what was different. She wanted to know what was universal and adapted that whatever was universal amongst indigenous peoples was also universal for all of us because we all have indigenous roots somewhere. And she wrote a book called The Fourfold Way, which is based on the medicine wheel. So with great respect for that which has been developed by the Native peoples of North America and the indigenous peoples around the world, I have loved the medicine wheel for much of my life. It has been beneficial to me, beneficial to others. Around 1996, Dr. Larry Peterson in Toronto, Ontario, and myself started experimenting with, could the medicine wheel itself be useful after engaging in a meeting using open space technology, and and could we help to sustain and harvest the benefits of an open space technology meeting into the ongoing life of the organization. And at that time, I was the senior staff person of an organization. So we were using the organization I was part of as the experiment ground to develop this further. We wrote a couple of papers about this in the 1990s, published by Birgitt Williams in their At Work journal. I went on to realize that for purposes of organizations, we needed to add some components to the medicine wheel to make it some parts of it more explicit for organizations. But the tool itself is not so much what you see in front of you, what you see as the medicine wheel. What the tool is the order in which to engage with each of the component parts. And we experimented, and I went on my own to keep experimenting with the order. And the order is uniquely mine. It starts with you enter the wheel from the center, not from any one of the directions. You wouldn't have, I don't think you'd have any Native person, any Indigenous person, whether it's called a medicine wheel or a gratitude hoop or whatever it's called throughout the world, saying that you're already in it, that you enter from the center. Different traditions have different ceremonies and different beliefs of where you enter and how and why. So this got developed, tested cross-culturally, the order that was consistent for sustainability and maximum harvest of what people were thinking about and talking about in their meetings. And then I had a challenge. I could have called it an organizational compass and just went on. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do that without acknowledging that the roots of this are in the medicine wheel of Indigenous peoples. And so there was a lot of discussion and debate about what to name this tool. And it does come out of medicine wheel traditions that I studied for a long time. It is not the medicine wheel of the Native peoples. And I don't want to pretend in any way that it is. And yet I wanted to give true honor to saying that the Indigenous peoples have had medicine wheel work for a long time. I then was handed by a Native elder that I knew an audio tape, and he said this, that was I forget what year that was, but he said, this might help you with this dilemma, Birgitt. And the tape was a recording of a speech on behalf of the Council of Elders that had happened in 1991, in which the elders said it was time now for the Indigenous peoples of the world that had held onto the teachings of the medicine wheel to take it from the use of what in the tape was called the red race and given to all of the human race to help with the times ahead. So that's the origin, as I can tell it, of this particular tool. And even if it's the medicine wheel tool itself that is learned about, it takes a lifetime of learning. You can learn it and then you learn it again and again. You always uncover more.
Thank you. As I was listening, I was thinking about with each of these tools, there's the original origin from somewhere outside, and then the adaptations and testing and work and refinement of each of these concepts into what have become these frequently used tools in genuine contact. And this was another great example of, in this case, thousands of years of history of an archetype and how it moved then into being a specific tool that we use within genuine contact. And there's such richness in all of those parts. So we're
Rachel, when you get into something that's like evidence-based, you actually also even get into the mandala, which is the circle of thousands and thousands of years in the East, and it's been since the beginning of recorded time, recorded history.
Yeah, so I love the richness of that, and also respect the difficulty of quantifying it into that sense of, I think at this time in history where we're looking for, but what is the scientific evidence? Where are the studies about these kinds of things? Which I think when you're looking at that many thousands of years of history, how do you possibly begin to study all the aspects of its development? So knowing where it has been in the last decades and its use particularly within genuine contact, I think is the important part to focus on there. We look now at the I happen to know second to last tool in our presentation, even though it is the last one on our list of frequently used tools, if you're keeping track from that slide earlier in this video. And this one is the organizational life cycle, and this relatively simplified version of it that we use within our Genuine Contact program.
And so many of our tools have been kept in their most simple way, although the originators of some of the work have gone on to further develop from their original work. And that's true in the case of organizational life cycle work. I like to keep to the most simple versions because we're not out to dazzle people. What we're out to do is to help them have conversations that will help them to do what they need to do with their organizations and understand their organizations better. So you will find that I will, in various tools and processes with genuine contact, I'll keep to something that is simple so that people can handle the complexity that they've got to deal with. This organizational life cycle, I recognize it as an oversimplified version. The studies on organizational life cycle that led to much of this particular diagram come from the work of iCheckadases, and you can do a search and you'll discover that there's an iCheckadases Foundation, and of course the work on life cycle work has gone on in these decades. This comes from work again done in the late 80s, early 90s, very useful, very helpful in for conversations, for awareness raising, for studies about an organization. I attribute Harrison Owen, developer of open space technology, with putting in the dotted line here that represents spirit. And so the original organizational life cycle work had the horizontal axis as time, the vertical axis as performance, and you'll see a line that goes through about structure. What was not in place at that time and what Harrison added, and this had to do with these deep conversations that we, several of us were having back in the day, was about spirit. And at the start of an organization, spirit felt really, really high. Things were inspiring. And then the spirit in an organization, as it gets so much into bureaucracy, starts to decline and decline quite rapidly. And this particular diagram and its use is also related to the concept of, is an organization an inspired organization to start with? Is that pure potential, that great inspiration? Yes, we can do it. This is an awesome place to be. All those wonderful feelings. Is that in the nature of an organization? And then do barriers get in the way, which, as I've mentioned earlier in this video, is definitely my belief. And this diagram is a great diagram to support that particular hypothesis about how organizations have their vitality and keep their vitality. This oversimplified diagram is not something that the I Jacket Aces Foundation uses anymore, because they have can show that it's there's many more opportunities to grow, um, to re-inspire an organization, to go through some kind of transformation and to re-inspire it. But for our teaching purposes, this is a great and consistent and cross-culturally useful tool to get those conversations going.
Thank you for all of that. That comes to the end of our frequently used tools, but we did want to share one more tool that, of course, is almost a symbol as we are showing it, the input object, which we're choosing to use a picture of a pair of tingshas or bells here to represent that input object today. But of course, it can be many things. Except for one. And so we wanted to raise it for you as a frequently used tool in Genuine Contact as the last thing to share in our video today. So I'll turn it over to you one more time, Birgitt, to share a little bit about this one.
Thank you. And so in our processes, our group work processes, we do use an object, and the person holding it is the one that gives the input. When that person's done, they put the object down, and then someone else picks it up who would like to give input, and that creates the behaviors of really listening and deep listening to the person who is speaking, and not talking over top of each other. And it reduces, conflicts and arguments and all sorts of things. So this input object is something that is used in many different process facilitation practices at this time. And what I wanted to talk about here, Rachel mentioned it, is that we use the bells, the tingsha, we might use a shell, we might use a microphone, we might use all sorts of objects, but the one object that we do not use is a stick. And there's a reason for that. In many facilitation methods, people will use a stick to be that input object. They talk about it as a talking stick. In my studies with the Indigenous people that I had the privilege to work with, they helped me to understand that there is a proper talking stick ceremony, and there are expected behaviors. If you enter into a talking stick ceremony, you are agreeing to participate and to not leave until that talking stick ceremony is complete, even if it takes a few days. And so, out of respect for the Indigenous people's talking stick ceremony, I do not use a stick as the input object, because in our processes, as in so many facilitated processes, we are using the object to help to manage facilitation, to help to denote who the speaker is, and it has nothing to do with the talking stick ceremony.
And I think that's an important reminder, both for when we're meeting in physical spaces, not using an actual stick, an actual decorative talking stick even, because of course those are available for purchase, but also in our online work and in our discussions about talking about how these things work in genuine contact, that we are mindful of that in the online environment as well, that we're using careful language and not referring to that input object as a talking stick is a really important one in all of those places. That brings us to the end of looking at the origin stories of each of these tools. I was thinking about the popularity right now with all of these origin stories of superhero movies that are coming out. And I feel a little bit like we are uncovering the origin story of our superhero tools in the same way. Thank you, Birgitt, for taking the time to share all of that information with me and with members of our organization now as we're getting ready to share this video, but also I think this will be a useful tool in the many years to come of the work of Genuine Contact, that we can have this collective knowledge together about where these tools came from, what their origin story is. Is there anything that you would like to say as we close out this video?
The first three that you identified as the implicit tools require a depth of understanding in order to, they require a depth of understanding. Each and every one of these tools was developed to help with what we have portrayed in those first three implicit tools. And so when you work with these tools, you're always working with story. You're always working to help people look at their illusion, their co-illusion. You're helping to demyth the organization and to help people to create the myths and the reality picture that they would like to have to be the best version of themselves. It's difficult work. It's helpful to understand that overall, that's what you're doing. So Rachel, thank you for doing this with me. You are also right that we tested out each of these tools frequently over a period of a decade to make sure that we were getting consistent results. And these tools with consistent results have now been used by hundreds of genuine contact professionals around the globe.
Thank you very much, and we hope for all of you that are watching that this video has been helpful diving into some of the origins of these things, both to satisfy your own curiosity and to prepare you for when you're talking about these tools with your clients, should the question of them come up. Just a quick reminder, for some of those tools, you'll also find a little how to use it video tutorial link in the written portion of whatever page it is that you are watching this video on.